Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so we are continuing our coverage on Weapons Plus. And here's a funny thing about this, right? Weapons Plus is probably the most important comic book that Marvel's releasing right now that no one's reading. And it's kind of a shame because there's so much going on in this whole Weapons Plus comic. And here's my bet. I would bet all the money in my pockets to all the money in your pockets that this is all going to go towards the Marvel Cinematic Universe in some form or fashion. What other reason is there to release and basically revamp the entirety of Weapons Plus if it's not going to be incorporated into the Marvel Cinematic Universe? It doesn't really make any sense, right? Because nobody was really asking for it. And that's one of the things we talked about in the first video. Nobody was really asking for like a revamp of Weapons Plus. It just came out of nowhere. Now, Marvel could be doing it of their own volition, but I feel like this is going to be a Marvel Cinematic Universe kind of thing. But the idea behind this in the first Weapons Plus that we had talked about, and this is one of the things that kind of came out of this, is Weapons Plus was historically, it was kind of a weird thing, right? Like Weapons Plus was originally just a Wolverine thing, and that was really all it was. Then it turned into, with Grant Morrison's run, it turned into Weapon 1, which was Captain America, running all the way up to Weapon X, which is Wolverine, and that's when the official Weapons Plus program came to an end. Unofficially, it continued on, right? You got Deadpool, you got the Stepford Cuckoos with, they were basically clones of Emma Frost. You got all kinds of stuff that came after Wolverine. But the officially sanctioned Weapons Plus program, as it was operated as a joint venture between Canada and the CIA, was basically disbanded. Like it was essentially gone. And so the funny thing about this, and what this did, at least in the first video that we did, is it basically established that Weapons Plus was alive and well, right? Like it was keeping on. And the extent of it, we didn't know, and we still don't know. But the crazy thing about this is that what it does is it basically has like this Weapon V facility, right? And it's interesting, you could call it Weapon 5, and that really kind of seems to be the case. It sort of seems to be like a dual meaning between Weapon 5 and like Weapon Venom. But what it does here is it basically says, okay, essentially like during the events of Absolute Carnage, when, Cletus Cassidy and his various mini counterparts, more or less, were kind of terrorizing throughout the city of New York and attacking various places, that what Cletus Cassidy has also been doing is striking at the heart of these various facilities. Because remember, the overall theme behind Absolute Carnage is that Cletus Cassidy is going after anybody who's ever worn a symbiote, right? Because anybody who's ever worn a symbiote gets this kind of codex that's basically bonded to their genetic material. And in turn, Cletus Cassidy, in order to increase his strength to become this wildly powerful being for what seems to be the purpose of going toe-to-toe with Null the symbiote god, all really seems to be rooted in this idea of gaining like these codices, right? These little codices that have been bonded to people. And so what ended up happening is somewhere along the line, he attacked this Weapon 5 facility. Now, what this does is it jumps directly to Clayton Cortez. Now, here's the thing about Clayton Cortez, right? I would say about a year ago, Greg Pak had this really, really cool idea that Marvel just kind of wasted. And the idea behind this was to essentially introduce something called Weapon H. Now, Weapon H was a cool idea. Like when it first popped up, it was a cool idea. But like I was considering covering it. The problem was I was looking at the entirety of the Marvel landscape at the time, and as soon as I saw that come out, my immediate thought was Marvel's not going to do anything with that. And the reason why is because what it ended up turning into was Marvel doing like this grand reshuffling, right? So it was like during like the old, Dan Slott Spider-Man run when Peter Parker went back to being Spider-Man, and it lasted like 12 to 14 issues, and then we got Secret War. So it was like, okay, so Peter Parker's back, but none of it's going to matter because we're basically getting Secret Wars. So you're going to have to wait until Secret Wars is done to see what happens with all of this. Of course, then we end up getting all new, all different Amazing Spider-Man and so on. But, looking at this, I was like, okay, I've seen this a million times, right? Like some character is introduced basically at like the precipice of what's going to be like a huge reshuffling at Marvel, and usually Marvel ends up wasting them. And that's what they did here, right? They wasted Clayton Cortez. The idea behind this is that William Stryker had his own kind of Weapons Plus program going on, not tied into like the overarching Weapons Plus thing, but basically his own sort of Weapons Plus idea. And that was really predicated on the notion of we got to kill mutants, so we'll just use Weapons Plus technology in order to do it. And so what ended up happening is William Stryker gathered together the genetic material of essentially the entire X-Force team at the time, and then in turn had them all bonded to Clayton Cortez. Now there was Weapon Beta and then Weapon Alpha, or at least Weapon H Beta and then Weapon H Alpha, or whatever you want to call it, H Beta, H Alpha. It was kind of a weird thing. But the idea behind this is that Clayton Cortez is basically Weapon Alpha, Weapon H. He was the prime version. And this is a guy who essentially has adamantium bonded to his skeleton. He's got the Incredible Hulk concept, right? So it's not unlimited strength, but it is like an insane amount of strength. And then he's also got Wolverine's claws, right? So he's a merger between two of these characters, along with some other characters too, right? Like Domino, different things like that. And this is an amazing idea. Like it is a super cool idea, but Marvel being Marvel wasted it. I imagine as time goes on, he may become more prominent, but the reality is that Weapon H is largely just a Greg Pak concept. That's really all it is, right? It's just only Greg Pak's thing. And so as a result of this, it's kind of crazy. For those of you guys who are new to comics, I want to talk about this for a second. For those of you guys who are new to comics, Marvel Comics operates very similar to like the WWE from wrestling. You have a character who hits their peak, usually the championship belt, and then for the most part, they just kind of fall to the wayside to make room for the new guys. And that's basically what happened with Greg Pak. He's an incredible writer, an amazing writer, but the idea here is that he basically peaked, for lack of a better word, with his run on the Incredible Hulk. But because it was selling so well, Marvel's just kind of like, do your own thing, man. So he just sort of gets shuffled off to no man's land, but has total control over what he wants to do, right? So he's like Stalin with the Infinity Saga. But the idea here is that Clayton Cortez, you know, some 6 minutes into this video, the idea is that Clayton Cortez ends up arriving back at his family home, or at least where his family's kind of residing at. Now, this is an important thing, and the reason why is because after he became Weapon H, and after he fought the Incredible Hulk, Wolverine, and then essentially left them and went to go do his own thing, he started going from Eagle Star facility to Eagle Star facility and essentially wiping out all the records of himself. And the reason why this matters is because Eagle Star was the group that Clayton was part of before he was forced into Weapon H. And Eagle Star was basically just kind of like this military contracting team, right? These guys who would just go out and take care of these various schemes. And that's actually where you end up getting into this little segment here, is that you end up in this scenario where Clayton's basically confronted with like his old boss, where it's like, we were supposed to wipe out that whole village, you didn't, so on and so forth. You know, and essentially they're there to basically capture him. They're there to like to grab him and bring him in. And the reason for that comes by way of a guy named Dr. Andrew Breen. Now, we'll talk about Andrew Breen here in a minute, because at the moment he's just kind of there, and he becomes more important as the story goes on, or at least once we get towards the end. But what he does is kind of give us this timeline of Weapons Plus. And this is a very important segment here. And the reason why is because in the first video it was kind of like, okay, here's the timeline of Weapons Plus based on what we know. And what this does is essentially clear all that up. And the cool thing about this is it really kind of goes back to what we originally talked about, right? This idea that what you had in the early days is you basically just kind of had this idea that existed out there, that Weapons Plus was basically the reason for the creation of Captain America. But the problem was that once Captain America was believed to have been dead, then the question became, what do we do next? And so that kind of went into what we talked about previously, where you had these weapons projects that were being created, Weapons 2 and 3 and 4 and so on and so forth. But the big thing was that in 1965, and this is what we kind of talked about in Absolute Carnage, it's sort of been hinted of, but it really kind of gets consolidated here, which is pretty nice. But in 1965, essentially S.H.I.E.L.D., led by Nick Fury, along with a handful of others, ended up coming into contact with what was basically the Grendel. Now, of course, those of you guys who were following Donny Cates' run, and those of you guys who were following Absolute Carnage are aware of this. But for those of you guys who are not, the Grendel's kind of like this leftover remnant, more or less, of when Null, the symbiote god, was kind of rampaging throughout the universe, right? And so the idea was that it was essentially frozen on Earth and just kind of stuck there. This led into the concept of the Sim Soldiers, right? So the idea of like Rex Strickland and so on and so forth over at Donny Cates' Venom run, as well as what we saw in the first Weapons Plus video. And this idea was that when, you know, with this kind of culminating with Russia's Department X, which basically gave us like the Winter Soldier, it gave us the Red Room, which produced women like Black Widow, Natasha Romanoff, and so on and so forth. Because of the fact that Weapons Plus was for the most part only really focusing on Russia, when they came across the Grendel, what they realized was the threat this Grendel posed. And so as a result of that, what they ended up doing was basically extracting sections of the Grendel off, right? Like these small little bits here and there, which were essentially, you know, the precursor to the Venom symbiote. And what they ended up doing was bonding it to guys like Rex Strickland, right? So this goes into that whole thing. Following that, what we end up learning here, and this is what we didn't know before, what we ended up learning here is that where it was previously believed that Weapons Plus, at least as part of it, you know, being a kind of government-sanctioned organization, was essentially gone, the reality is that's not the case. That Weapons Plus still appears to be a government-sanctioned organization, albeit operating in like a super deep clandestine way. But characters like Anti-Venom, like Flash Thompson, he's a byproduct of Weapons Plus. What this is doing is basically grabbing the entire Venom mythos as it exists, both by way of what Donny Cates is doing, as well as people before him, with the introduction of like Flash Thompson as Agent Venom and so on and so forth, and is consolidating all of it down into a singular timeline. And that's a genius idea, because what this basically means is that every iteration of the Venom symbiote as it's appeared in Marvel Comics as part of any kind of military team or any kind of specialized operations team like Agent Venom has all been sanctioned and secretly controlled by the Weapons Plus organization. And this is cool. Like, this is really awesome, because from there, like, what it means is it literally kind of brings it all together, right? And that's one of the things that Marvel's been focusing on a lot recently, is creating more cohesiveness. Not only that, what we also end up learning is that while Urquhart, who's basically the direct supervisor, or at least was the direct superior of Clayton Clayton Cortez when he was part of Eagle Star, while they had essentially gone underground and they still exist as a team, they're now simply referred to as like Mars Team, as opposed to like the Eagle Star Group or anything like that. It's a way to kind of cast off the previous name and then sort of operate as kind of a Black Ops wet work team and essentially stay off the radar without anybody hitting them up for like contracts or anything along those lines. But the idea here is they were the ones that were originally at the Weapon V facility when Carnage first attacked in the beginning of the story, and then they basically made it out, you know, by the skin of their teeth, but they're launching this attack yet again. And that's why they're bringing in Clayton Cortez, because Clayton Cortez is a heavy hitter, right? Like he's a big hitter. And so that's when you kind of end up switching over to Cletus Cassidy, who's actually sitting at a bus stop. And the idea here is that Cletus Cassidy is ultimately drawn to these guys. And this is a cool little bit of a revelation here, right? Because this is one of the reasons why tie-ins can oftentimes really expand and make a story a lot more interesting. The Cletus Cassidy is traveling all over the world to find anybody who's ever hosted the Venom symbiote. And the fact that these you know, former Eagle Star turned Mars Team guys are basically sim soldiers, meaning that they're harnessing the power of the Grendel, means they all have codices. And so as a result of that, Carnage is going after them as well. And that's the cool thing, is it's not just about superpowered beings. And it's interesting to see, because when this bus comes cruising in, right, this bus comes flying in, Cletus Cassidy of course is on it, but he's killed everybody there. And this is one of the funny things that goes on, is because what this really shows is that in terms of the government's perception, or at least Weapons Plus's perception of Carnage and what it is that he's capable of now, they're painfully ill-equipped, right? They're painfully unprepared. And the reason why is because all they really know about what Carnage is capable of at the moment is what they've seen in the various footage from the Battle of New York, because they're not really there, as well as the existing knowledge they have when it comes to the symbiotes. But remember, the Grendels are cut above the rest. This is not just your regular Venom symbiote. These guys are really bred, and really the Grendel concept itself is really designed to be like this kind of uber symbiote, which of course serves the will of Null the symbiote god. And so with Carnage walking around with this sort of power, and then in turn these sim soldiers walking around with something akin to this power, their initial thought is, okay, so symbiotes are basically weak to sonic and fire, so we'll use that, neither of which work, right? I mean, neither of those bring him down, and Carnage just comes running out. And it makes sense, right? Like the entirety of Absolute Carnage would be kind of a bust if it's just like, so all they need is fire. Okay, well then just go get Pyro from like the X-Men and just watch how fast he kills Carnage. You know, like Pyro shows up and he's like, somebody give me a lighter, you know, or bring in like you know, Ghost Rider or anybody who can manipulate any kind of hellfire, and they would totally destroy Carnage. And so it's cool to see that that's not the case. Instead, what you get here is this pretty knockdown, drag out fight between Weapon H and Carnage itself. And this, you know, while this it's not the grandiose thing ever, this is really Marvel just kind of proving a point and showing us where Carnage is. And the reason for that is because when you read the Absolute Carnage event itself and you see him face off against various characters, it is interesting, but you can kind of chalk that up to the nature of Carnage, right? There really isn't a whole lot that's happened there that's just like, okay, so just here's how far he is above everybody else. You haven't really seen a whole lot of that yet. And the reason why is because a lot of the conflict that you've seen has really been confined to like the Spider-based and the Venom-based characters, right? So it's been confined to like Miles Morales and to like Spider-Man and to Venom and things like that. But these are characters that while they are powerful in their own right, seeing Carnage face off against the Incredible Hulk was more of Carnage outwitting the Incredible Hulk as opposed to outfighting the strength of the Incredible Hulk. And so again, it's kind of cool in that regard. But what you're seeing here is a knockdown, drag out fight between what's effectively the Incredible Hulk and Wolverine merged into a singular person and Carnage. Now again, there are limitations here, right? Clayton Cortez does not have infinite strength. It doesn't really go on that way. And then that's when you start getting into what's going on with Dr. Breen. And Dr. Breen, what he's been doing is that where he's been putting eye drops in his eyes. And the idea here is that he had some sort of, you know, vision impairment or something along those lines, that he needed those for, you know, hence the reason he was wearing glasses. The reality is that he's been dropping the Grendel into his eyes. And the reason why is because he said he wanted to see the world the way the Grendel does. And this is kind of a cool thing, because what it does is it basically says that like you've got the Grendel out there, this Grendel symbiote thing more or less is out there, and little pieces of it have been siphoned off over the years, and that's where the sim soldiers come from. But essentially it sees the world in a different way insofar as it's governed by a singular ideology. And that's what Breen had picked up on. Breen had essentially gone insane. It's really what this is. Like he's absolutely lost his mind. But the idea here is that all he sees when he puts, you know, has the Grendel in his eyes is God is coming, right? Like God is on his way here. Everybody's basically going to die. And it's essentially all kind of pointing to this notion that Null the symbiote god is going to return, which makes the most sense. It's really the direction everything's going in. And Absolute Carnage would kind of be a bust if like Null never returned, right? If it was just like, no, he's not coming back, he's just been dead this whole time, that'd be kind of a bust, right? It'd be kind of disappointing. And so it's cool to see that kind of thing showing back up here. The result of this is that because of the fact that Clayton Cortez had never actually worn a symbiote itself, and because Clayton Cortez doesn't really care, right? He's kind of out doing his own thing. He ultimately just ends up leaving Mars Team to itself, right? He's just kind of like, whatever, I'm gonna leave. And he ends up taking somebody with him and basically bailing out. and that's basically it, right? Like he grabs the stepmom and they end up leaving. It's kind of a funny thing because the stepmom hates him, but to see them kind of reconcile is interesting, but that only really matters if you're reading Weapon H, right? If you're not reading Weapon H, none of that really matters to you. It's not really relevant to you. The idea and kind of the big takeaway that seems to be coming out of this is Weapon H, it looks like Clayton may end up joining the Avengers, but that's the nature of it, right? The nature of this is that this guy's trying to go out and do his own thing and doesn't really want to be bothered with the rest of the world. He kind of wants to just stay off the radar and stay hidden. And so it would make perfect sense if he didn't, if it was just like him fighting Carnage, which is kind of a cool little thing. In reality, if that's the case, all this is really designed to do by Marvel is to get, you know, him out more into the public eye and get people to read his comics more. But it is a cool concept, right? Because this entire conflict was basically being monitored by Weapons Plus. They were watching this whole thing go down. And ultimately, Weapons Plus sees it. It's just an interesting concept. But at the end of the day, they're like, we've got other things we want to worry about, namely Weapon 30, right? Like Weapon XXX. And this is kind of a cool thing because it's like, okay, so like what other weapons are they focusing on? But the overall gist behind this is that it still continues the kind of mystery behind the idea of Weapons Plus. It continues the mystery behind what's going on with it and how all that's kind of unfolding. Here's kind of a cool thing here is this guy, this person who's overseeing it is actually just drinking from a Captain America mug, right? And it's kind of a cool thing because while you do have one of his guys off to the side who's basically reporting to him, my question, and this would be really, really awesome here, if it turned out to be evil Steve Rogers from like Secret Empire, that would be amazing. It'd be like this amazing revelation where he's basically rebranding and reworking and running the entirety of Weapons Plus behind the scenes. I would love that. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.